Imagine a boy sitting alone under an apple tree. The wind is soft, the sky is blue, everything around him is quiet. Then, suddenly, an apple falls. It hits the ground with a small thump. The boy watches it. He does not pick it up. He does not eat it. He just stares at it. And in that one quiet moment, a question forms in his mind. A question so powerful, so deep, so simple, that it would one day change the entire world. That boy was Isaac Newton, and this is his story. It was a cold winter morning. The date was January 4, 1643. In a tiny village called Woolsthorpe, in the English countryside, a baby was born. He was so small, so weak. The women who helped with the birth were not sure he would survive. They whispered to each other that the baby was too tiny, too fragile. One woman even said that he could fit inside a small pot. His body was so small that nobody believed he would live through the night. But he did. He survived that first night. Then the next, then the next. Slowly, day by day, the tiny baby grew a little stronger. His name was Isaac. Isaac Newton. But the sadness around his birth did not stop there. Isaac never met his father. His father, also named Isaac Newton, had died 3 months before the baby was born. So from the very first day of his life, Isaac came into a world without a father, into a world of uncertainty, into a world of struggle. His mother, Hannah, was a strong woman. She loved her baby deeply. She held him close. She kept him warm. She watched over him carefully. For the first 2 years of his life, it was just the two of them, a young mother and her tiny, fragile son. Then, everything changed again. When Isaac was just 3 years old, his mother received a marriage proposal from a man named Barnabas Smith. Barnabas was a wealthy clergyman. He was older, he was stable, and marrying him would give Hannah a better life. But there was a condition. Barnabas did not want to raise another man's child. He refused to take young Isaac into his new home. Hannah faced an impossible choice. She could stay with her son and live in poverty, or she could marry and give herself a better life. She chose to marry, and little Isaac was left behind. He was sent to live with his grandmother, Marjorie Ascuff. Think about that for a moment. Isaac was only 3 years old. He was too young to understand why his mother left. He was too young to understand that she was just a short walk away, living in a nearby house with her new husband. All he knew was that his mother was gone and that he was alone. This moment shaped Isaac in ways that no one could have imagined. He grew up feeling lonely. He grew up feeling different. He grew up feeling like the world did not quite have a place for him. He rarely smiled. He rarely played with other children. He kept to himself. He lived inside his own thoughts. His grandmother tried her best. She fed him. She cared for him. But she could not replace the warmth of a mother's love. And Isaac, young and sensitive as he was, felt that absence every single day. When Isaac was 10 years old, something changed again. His stepfather, Barnabas Smith, died. His mother returned. She came back to Woolsthorpe with 3 new children from her second marriage. The family was together again. But Isaac found it hard to reconnect with his mother. Too many years had passed. Too much distance had grown between them. He had spent 7 years without her. 7 years of quiet nights, 7 years of questions without answers, 7 years of sitting alone, watching the world, and wondering why things were the way they were. And somewhere in those 7 years, a habit formed. The habit of thinking, the habit of observing, the habit of asking questions that other people never asked. That habit would one day make him the greatest scientist the world had ever seen. When Isaac was 12 years old, his mother sent him to school. He attended the King's School in Grantham, a town not far from Woolsthorpe. Because the school was some distance away, Isaac had to live with a local apothecary, a man named William Clark. An apothecary was someone who made and sold medicines and herbal remedies. Living in an apothecary's home was like living in a world of wonder for Isaac. There were strange herbs hanging from the ceiling. There were bottles filled with mysterious liquids. There were books about chemistry and medicine on every shelf. Isaac was fascinated. He spent hours reading those books. He spent hours studying the mixtures and remedies. He was like a sponge, absorbing everything around him. But school itself was a different story. At first, Isaac was not a good student. He was distracted. He was dreamy. He spent more time making things with his hands than learning his lessons. He built tiny windmills. He made little wooden models. He designed kites. He created small mechanical devices just to see how they worked. The other boys at school thought he was strange. They did not understand him. Some of them made fun of him. Isaac was quiet and different things are always easy targets for mockery. There was one boy in particular who was a bully. He was bigger than Isaac. He was stronger, and he enjoyed making Isaac feel small. One day, this bully kicked Isaac hard in the stomach. It was unprovoked. It was mean. Isaac felt the pain and the humiliation at the same time. But something interesting happened after that kick. Isaac did not cry and walk away. Instead, he made a decision. He was going to beat that bully, not with his fists, but with his brain. He was going to prove that he was better, not in a fight, but in school, in learning, in achievement. From that day on, Isaac threw himself into his studies. He worked harder than he ever had before. He stayed up late reading. He practiced every lesson until he understood it perfectly. He rose from the bottom of his class to the very top. He became the best student in the school. And the bully? He was left far behind. That kick changed something inside Isaac. It lit a fire. It gave him a reason to push himself. And it taught him something important. He learned that the greatest revenge is not violence. The greatest revenge is becoming excellent. Isaac loved learning so much that he kept notebooks filled with observations. He wrote down everything he noticed about the world around him. The way shadows moved, the way sunlight reflected off water, the way a candle flame flickered. He was not just studying. He was looking at the world with new eyes. In Grantham, he became close with the Clark family. Mr. Clark's stepdaughter, a girl named Catherine, became one of Isaac's only friends. She was kind to him. She talked with him. She listened to his ideas. Isaac, who had always struggled to connect with people, found in Catherine a rare and genuine friendship. But life has a way of interrupting happiness. When Isaac was 17, his mother called him home. She needed help on the farm. She wanted him to learn how to manage the land and the animals. She believed that being a farmer was a practical and honest way to live. She thought that school and books and ideas were fine for dreaming, but real life required real work. Isaac returned to Woolsthorpe. He tried his best. He really did. But he was a terrible farmer. He forgot to feed the animals. He let the pigs wander into other people's fields. He sat under trees reading books instead of repairing fences. He was distracted constantly, always lost in thought. His mother was frustrated. She did not understand him. She saw a boy who seemed lazy, who could not focus on simple tasks. She did not see that his mind was always working, always turning ideas over and over, always trying to understand something deeper. Luckily, Isaac had a wise uncle. His name was William Ascough. He visited the family and quickly saw the truth. He saw that Isaac was not lazy. He was extraordinary. He was a young man whose mind was built for thinking, not farming. William had a quiet conversation with Hannah. He spoke gently but clearly. "This boy should go to university," he told her. "His mind is not made for this land. His mind is made for something greater." Hannah listened. She was not fully convinced, but she trusted her brother. And so, with some reluctance, she agreed to let Isaac go back to school to prepare for university. Isaac returned to Grantham. He studied harder than ever. He caught up quickly. He was focused now with a purpose and a destination. And in 1661, at the age of 18, Isaac Newton was accepted to Trinity College at Cambridge University. The boy from the tiny village of Woolsthorpe was going to one of the greatest universities in the world. Cambridge was a place of old stone buildings, tall towers, and ancient libraries. It was a place full of ideas and traditions. Students wore long robes. Professors walked the cobblestone paths in silence. The smell of old books and candle wax filled every room. But Isaac arrived at Cambridge as a Caesar. A Caesar was a poor student who had to work in exchange for his education. He cleaned the rooms of richer students. He served them at meals. He ran errands. While other students from wealthy families relaxed and enjoyed their time, Isaac worked and studied at the same time. It was humbling. It was exhausting. But Isaac did not complain. He had learned long ago how to endure loneliness and hardship. He put his head down and got on with it. The curriculum at Cambridge in those days was based mostly on old texts. Students studied Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher. They learned old ideas about how the world worked. Most professors simply repeated what had been written hundreds of years before. There was very little new thinking. But Isaac was hungry for more. He was not satisfied with old ideas. He wanted to understand the world as it actually was. He started reading new books on his own, books that were changing the way people thought. He read Descartes, the French mathematician and philosopher. He read about the new astronomy of Galileo. He studied geometry and algebra deeply. He spent long nights reading by candlelight, filling notebook after notebook with his own thoughts, his own calculations, his own ideas. He barely slept. He barely ate. His entire world shrank down to the point of a quill on a page. His fellow students found him difficult to understand. He did not join them for walks. He did not share meals and conversation easily. He was always thinking, always somewhere else in his mind. Some thought he was strange. Some thought he was arrogant. But a few could see that he was something rare, something exceptional. One of the most important things Isaac noticed during his time at Cambridge was that much of what was being taught felt incomplete. The old explanations for how the world worked had gaps. They did not fully explain everything. And Isaac, who had spent his whole life asking questions, could not walk past a gap without trying to fill it. He began to develop his own ideas, slowly, carefully, with enormous discipline and focus. And then, in 1665, everything stopped. The Great Plague arrived in England. It swept through cities and towns like fire. People fell sick and died in enormous numbers. There was no cure. There was no medicine that worked. The only way to survive was to stay away from other people. Cambridge University closed its doors. All students were sent home. Isaac returned to Woolsthorpe. He was 22 years old. He came back to the village where he had grown up, back to the fields, back to the apple trees, back to the quiet. For most people, being forced to stay home during a plague would mean fear, boredom, and waiting. But for Isaac Newton, those months at Woolsthorpe became the most productive period in the history of science. Away from the distractions of university, alone with his thoughts and his notebooks, Isaac's mind began to work at extraordinary speed. Ideas came flooding in. He did not just think about one problem. He thought about many at the same time. He worked on mathematics. He worked on light. He worked on motion. He worked on gravity. In the quiet of Woolsthorpe, in the space of roughly 18 months, Isaac Newton laid the foundations for three of the greatest scientific discoveries in human history. Let that sink in. 18 months. Three world-changing discoveries. The first was mathematics. Isaac invented a new form of mathematics called calculus. It was a way of calculating things that were changing, things that moved, things that curved, things that grew or shrank over time. Nothing like it had existed before. It was a completely new tool for understanding the universe. The second was light. Isaac noticed that sunlight looked white. But was it really white? He experimented with a glass prism. He shone a beam of sunlight through it. The prism separated the light into a beautiful rainbow of colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. He realized that white light was not pure. It was made of all the colors combined. This discovery opened up an entirely new understanding of how light and color worked. The third was gravity. And this is where the apple tree comes in. Isaac was sitting in the garden at Woolsthorpe one afternoon. The air was warm. The trees were full of leaves, and an apple fell from a branch. It dropped straight down to the ground. Isaac watched it. He asked himself a question that seemed simple but was actually revolutionary. Why did the apple fall down? Why not sideways? Why not upward? What force was pulling it toward the earth? He knew about Galileo's work, that objects fall at the same rate regardless of their weight. But he wanted to know more. He wanted to understand the invisible force behind the falling. He started thinking about the moon. The moon orbited the earth. What kept it in its path? What stopped it from flying off into the darkness of space? And slowly, carefully, over days and weeks and months of thinking and calculating, Isaac came to an extraordinary conclusion. The same force that pulled the apple to the ground was the same force that kept the moon in orbit around the earth. Not two different forces. One force. One universal force. Gravity. He began calculating. He used mathematics to test his idea. He worked out the numbers. He compared the force needed to hold the moon in its orbit with the force he calculated at the surface of the earth. They matched. The idea was correct. Gravity was not just a local force, something that happened only on Earth. It was a universal force. It reached out across the sky, across space, across the entire universe. Every object with mass pulled every other object toward it. The greater the mass, the stronger the pull. The greater the distance, the weaker the pull. Isaac Newton, sitting under an apple tree in a small English village during a plague, had discovered one of the most fundamental laws of the universe. But here is what makes this story even more remarkable. He did not tell anyone. He wrote his ideas in his notebooks. He checked his calculations again and again. He kept the discovery to himself for years. Why? Because he was not sure it was perfect. Because he always wanted to understand more before he spoke. Because he was afraid that sharing incomplete ideas would lead to arguments and misunderstandings. Isaac Newton was a deeply private man. He preferred the silence of his own mind to the noise of public debate. So the greatest discoveries of the 17th century sat quietly in notebooks, waiting for the right moment. The plague eventually passed. Cambridge reopened. Isaac returned. He was now a changed man. He had been transformed by those 18 months of intense, solitary thinking. He had ideas that went far beyond anything being taught at the university. In 1667, Isaac became a fellow of Trinity College. This was a prestigious position. It gave him a room, a salary, and the freedom to conduct research. He did not have to serve other students anymore. He could focus entirely on his work. He continued to experiment with light. He built a new kind of telescope. The telescopes of his day used glass lenses to magnify distant objects. But glass had a problem. It bent different colors of light at slightly different angles, which blurred the image. Isaac solved this problem by using a curved mirror instead of a lens. His reflecting telescope produced much clearer images. It was a beautiful piece of engineering, built with his own hands. When members of the Royal Society, England's most respected scientific organization, saw his telescope, they were amazed. They invited Isaac to present his ideas about light. He became a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1672. It was a great honor, but success brought something Isaac had always feared. It brought attention. It brought argument. It brought criticism. When Isaac published his theory of light and colors, another scientist named Robert Hooke attacked it. Hooke was a powerful figure in the scientific community. He was arrogant and competitive. He told anyone who would listen that Isaac's ideas were wrong. He argued. He criticized. He dismissed. Isaac was devastated. He had worked so hard. He had been so careful. And now someone was tearing his ideas apart in public. He hated conflict. He hated argument. He could not stand the thought of his carefully built ideas being destroyed by someone else's ego. He wrote back. He defended his work. He explained his experiments clearly and logically. But the argument exhausted him emotionally. It drained him in a way that pure thinking never did. He made a decision. He would share less of his work with the world. He would keep more of it private. He would protect himself from the pain of public criticism by simply staying silent. And so, many of his greatest ideas continued to sit in notebooks. Waiting, the years passed. Isaac buried himself in his work. He spent enormous amounts of time on optics, the study of light. He spent time on mathematics. He spent time on a subject that very few people know about today. He spent many years studying alchemy, the old practice of trying to turn metals into gold, and theology, the deep study of religious ideas and the Bible. Isaac Newton was not just a scientist. He was a deeply spiritual man. He believed that the universe had been created by God. He believed that understanding the laws of nature was a way of understanding the mind of God. Science and faith were not opposites for him. They were two roads leading to the same truth. He rarely slept. He sometimes forgot to eat. Students at Cambridge whispered that his food often sat cold and untouched on his table because he had been thinking too hard to remember to eat it. He lived almost entirely inside his own mind. He had very few close friends. He found human relationships difficult. He was sensitive to criticism to an almost painful degree. He could work for hours in absolute silence, focused completely on a problem, and then emerge with an answer that would take other people years to find. He was, in many ways, a lonely genius, brilliant beyond measure. But human in his longing for connection. Then came Edmund Halley. Edmund Halley was a young astronomer. He is famous today for the comet named after him, Halley's Comet. But in 1684, he was known as a curious and passionate scientist who wanted to understand the movement of planets. There was a question that had been puzzling astronomers for years. Planets move in elliptical orbits around the sun, paths that are shaped like stretched circles. But nobody could explain exactly why. What force caused this motion? What law governed it? Halley went to visit Isaac Newton in Cambridge. He walked up to Newton's rooms, knocked on the door, and asked the question directly. What shape would the orbit of a planet be, he asked. If the force of the sun on the planet decreases with the square of the distance? Newton answered immediately. An ellipse, he said as Halley stared at him. How do you know that? Because I have calculated it, Newton replied. Halley was stunned. He asked to see the calculations. Newton searched through his papers. He could not find them. He had calculated it years ago and then put the papers away somewhere. He promised Halley he would redo the calculation and send it to him. And so Isaac Newton sat down once more and worked through the mathematics again. But this time he did not stop. The problem opened up a door. Behind that door was everything he had been thinking about for 20 years. All the ideas about motion, about gravity, about force, about the universe that had been sitting quietly in his notebooks suddenly came flooding back. He began to write. He wrote and wrote and wrote. He barely stopped. He went back to his earlier work from the plague years and expanded it, refined it, perfected it. He worked for 18 months with almost superhuman focus. He produced one of the greatest scientific works in human history. The book was called Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica. In English, that means the mathematical principles of natural philosophy. Most people just call it the Principia. It contained his 3 laws of motion and his law of universal gravitation. It explained how objects move. It explained why they move. It explained the force of gravity. It explained the orbits of planets. It explained the movement of the tides. It explained almost everything that moved and pulled and pushed in the physical universe. Edmund Halley recognized immediately that this was extraordinary. He helped Newton organize and publish the book. He even paid for the printing out of his own money, because the Royal Society had spent its budget on another book that year. Without Halley's support, the Principia might never have been published. In 1687, the book was released to the world, and the world was never the same again. Scientists across Europe read the Principia with a mixture of awe and disbelief. What Newton had done seemed almost impossible. He had taken the entire physical universe and reduced it to a handful of elegant laws. He had shown that the same force that governed a falling apple governed the orbit of the moon, that the same rules that applied on Earth applied across the entire universe. It was a revolution, not a violent revolution. A revolution of understanding. A revolution of the mind. But not everyone was immediately welcoming. Some scientists in Europe, particularly in France and Germany, had their own theories about how the universe worked. They were not ready to accept an English mathematician's ideas without argument. And Robert Hooke raised his voice again. He claimed that he had come up with the idea of gravity before Newton. He demanded credit. He argued loudly and bitterly. Newton's response was a mixture of private fury and public dignity. He did not lower himself to open argument, but he was deeply hurt. He threatened to leave out the third and most important section of the Principia entirely, rather than have it associated with Hooke's name. Eventually, the book was published in full, but the Hooke controversy left a scar on Newton that never fully healed. He became even more guarded, even more unwilling to share his work. There is a famous line that Newton wrote in a letter to Robert Hooke, a line that is often quoted today. He wrote, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Many people read this as humility, as Newton graciously acknowledging the scientists who came before him. And perhaps it was partly that. But some historians believe it was also a subtle dig at Hooke, who was famously short in stature. The meaning beneath the politeness was sharp. Newton was human. He had pride. He had rivalry. He had wounds. Behind the towering intellect was a man who felt deeply, who remembered slights, who struggled with relationships just like anyone else. Despite the controversy, the Principia made Newton famous. He became the most celebrated scientist in England. Kings and princes and philosophers sought his opinion. He was no longer just a quiet professor in Cambridge. He was a national treasure. But fame did not bring happiness. In 1693, when Newton was 50 years old, he suffered a serious mental breakdown. He wrote strange and disturbing letters to friends. He accused people of plotting against him. He could not sleep. He could not think clearly. His mind, which had always been his greatest strength, seemed to be turning against him. Historians have debated the cause for centuries. Some believe it was the enormous mental strain of years of intense work. Some believe it was the result of chemical poisoning, perhaps from the mercury he had used in his alchemy experiments. Some believe it was emotional exhaustion from years of loneliness and conflict. Whatever the cause, Isaac Newton fell apart. The man who had understood the movement of planets could not for a time find his footing on the ground beneath his feet. Slowly, over several months, he recovered. He emerged from the darkness quieter and more withdrawn than before. He knew that something had broken inside him. He knew that he needed to change the way he lived. He made a decision to leave Cambridge. He had spent more than 30 years there. It was time for something new. In 1696, Isaac Newton was appointed Warden of the Royal Mint. The Royal Mint was the place where all of England's coins were made. It was an important position. England was suffering badly at the time from a problem called counterfeiting. People were shaving tiny bits of silver from the edges of coins and melting those bits down. They were also making fake coins from cheaper metals. The money supply was being slowly destroyed. Most people thought the job of warden was ceremonial, a nice title for a famous man who would sit in an office and not do much. They were wrong. Newton threw himself into the work with the same intensity he brought to everything. He studied the problem. He understood the chemistry. He organized operations. He personally pursued counterfeiters through the courts. He gathered evidence. He interviewed witnesses. He sent guilty men to prison and some to the gallows. He was not gentle about it. He was relentless. Counterfeiting was a serious crime that hurt ordinary people, and Newton treated it that way. He became, in his later years, a detective as well as a scientist. He was so successful that he was eventually promoted to Master of the Mint, an even more powerful position. He oversaw a complete recoinage of England's money. He introduced new coins with milled edges, making them much harder to shave or fake. He modernized the entire system. English currency became more stable and more trustworthy because of him. Isaac Newton, the boy who once forgot to feed the pigs on his mother's farm, had become one of the most effective administrators in England. Life is full of surprises. In 1703, Robert Hooke died. It sounds cold to mention this so directly, but for Newton, it mattered. Hooke had been a source of bitterness and pain for decades. With Hooke gone, Newton finally felt free to share more of his work. That same year, Newton was elected President of the Royal Society. It was the highest scientific honor in England. He held the position for 24 years, until the end of his life. In 1704, he published his other great work, Optics. It was a book about light and color, about the experiments he had done 30 years earlier with the prism. It was written in English, not Latin, so that more people could read it. It was clear, it was elegant, it was beautiful, and it opened up entirely new fields of scientific study. In 1705, Queen Anne knighted him. He became Sir Isaac Newton. The poor César, who had once cleaned other students' rooms, had become a knight of England. It was a long journey, from a tiny cottage in Woolsthorpe to the court of a queen, from a fragile baby who was not expected to survive his first night to the most celebrated mind of his age. But even in his greatest years of recognition, Newton remained restless. He remained curious. He was never satisfied with what he knew. He always believed there was more to discover, more to understand. He once said something remarkable. He described himself as a boy playing on the seashore, finding a smooth pebble here, a prettier shell there, while the great ocean of truth lay undiscovered before him. Think about what that means. This was the man who had discovered the laws of motion and gravity, who had invented calculus, who had explained the nature of light. And he said that all of that was just a few pebbles on a beach. The ocean was still there, vast and unexplored. That kind of humility is extraordinary. Not false humility, real humility. The humility of someone who truly understood how much there was left to know. As he grew older, Newton's health began to decline. He had always pushed his body hard. He had never taken care of himself the way he should have. Too many sleepless nights, too many skipped meals, too many hours bent over a desk by candlelight. He moved to London permanently and lived out his remaining years in a house in Kensington. He continued to attend the Royal Society meetings. He continued to read. He continued to think. But the fire was slower now. The body could not keep up with the mind. His niece, Catherine Barton, lived with him and cared for him in his old age. She was bright and warm and kind, and she provided Newton with some of the human warmth that had been missing from much of his life. She managed his household. She received his guests. She made sure he ate properly. In the last years of his life, Newton slept more. He rested more. He accepted, reluctantly, that the body has limits even when the mind does not want to stop. He never married. He had no children. The relationships in his life had always been difficult. He had been close to very few people. The loneliness that had begun when his mother left him at the age of 3 had never fully left him. It was a shadow he lived with all his life. Some people find that sad, and in some ways it is. But perhaps the solitude was also part of what made him who he was. The hours alone, the quiet, the space to think without interruption. Perhaps the loneliness was the price of the extraordinary. On March 20, 1727, Isaac Newton died peacefully in his sleep. He was 84 years old. He had lived a long and extraordinary life. His body was laid in state in Westminster Abbey, the same place where kings and queens are honored. The greatest philosopher of his age was given a funeral worthy of a monarch. But the true measure of his life is not found in the funeral. It is found in what his ideas did to the world after he died. The laws of motion and gravity that Newton discovered are still used today. Every time an engineer designs a bridge, Newton's laws are at work. Every time a pilot charts a flight path, Newton's mathematics is being used. Every time a rocket is launched into space, every single calculation is built on the foundation that Isaac Newton laid. The missions to the moon, the satellites that orbit the Earth, the space probes traveling to the edges of the solar system. All of it is built on Newton's work. The world we live in, with its machines, its technology, its engineering marvels, would not exist without what one small, fragile, lonely boy figured out while sitting alone in a quiet garden during a plague. There is something else about Newton's story that most people do not think about. Something that goes beyond the science, something personal, something human. Isaac Newton was not born into privilege. He was not born into a loving, stable family. He was born poor. He was born without a father. His mother left him when he was 3. He was mocked at school. He failed as a farmer. He was emotionally wounded. He had periods of darkness so severe that they broke him temporarily. He was not a perfect man. He was proud. He was sometimes petty. He held grudges. He had enemies. He made mistakes. And yet, through all of that, he kept thinking. He kept asking questions. He kept sitting down at his desk and working through problems. When the world was frightening and full of plague, he went home and discovered gravity. When his colleagues attacked his ideas, He went back to his notebooks and worked harder. When he broke down, he recovered and went on. There is something profoundly encouraging about that. The greatest mind in the history of science was also a struggling, imperfect, sometimes broken human being. And he changed the world anyway. That means something. It means that difficulty is not a disqualification. It means that struggle is not the end of the story. It means that the circumstances you are born into do not determine the size of what you can achieve. Think for a moment about that apple tree in Woolsthorpe. The apple falls. A young man watches it. He asks a question. Why does it fall down? That is the question that changed the world. Not a complicated question, not an expensive question. Not a question that required a laboratory or a university or a royal title. Just a young man sitting quietly, paying attention to the world around him and asking why. The capacity to ask why is something every human being has. Children ask why constantly. They ask why the sky is blue, why water is wet, why fire burns, why people cry. And then gradually, as they grow up, many people stop asking. They accept the world as it is. They stop wondering. They get busy with the ordinary tasks of living. Newton never stopped asking why. From the time he was a small boy staring at shadows on the wall of his grandmother's house, to the time he was an old man in London, he never stopped asking why. That is perhaps his greatest gift to us. Not just the answers he found, but the example he set. The reminder that curiosity is a kind of power, that the right question, asked at the right moment, can change everything. There is a story that one of Newton's students once asked him how he had made his discoveries. How had he arrived at such extraordinary ideas when so many other brilliant people had missed them? Newton thought for a moment. Then he answered simply, "By thinking about them continually," he said. "By thinking about them continually. That is it. That is the whole secret. Not genius, not luck, not a flash of inspiration that came from nowhere. Just relentless, patient, continuous thinking, sitting with a problem for days, for months, for years, refusing to walk away from a question until an answer emerged. He had the patience of a mountain. He would return to the same problem over and over again, each time from a slightly different angle, each time with a slightly different tool, until the wall gave way and the answer stepped through. Most people stop. Most people hit a wall and turn back. Newton hit the wall and sat down in front of it and just kept thinking. And eventually, always, the wall came down. Newton's story carries so many lessons for every one of us. He teaches us that a difficult beginning is not a permanent ending. He was small and weak at birth. He lost his father before he was born. His mother left him when he was 3, and from those beginnings, he became the greatest scientist in history. He teaches us that failure is part of the path. He failed as a farmer. He struggled to connect with people. He had a mental breakdown at 50. He lost battles with rivals, and he kept going. He teaches us that silence and solitude have value. In a world that is always loud, always busy, always demanding our attention, Newton's story reminds us that some of the greatest things happen in quiet, in stillness, in the space between one moment and the next. He teaches us that curiosity is more valuable than certainty. Newton never stopped wondering. He never decided that he knew enough. He always believed there was more to understand. He teaches us that the work is what matters, not the recognition, not the applause, not the fame. Newton kept his greatest discoveries private for years because he was not ready to share them. He cared more about getting it right than getting the credit. And he teaches us something perhaps most important of all. He teaches us that we are all, at the end of the day, children standing at the edge of a vast ocean. No matter how much we learn, no matter how far we travel, The ocean is always bigger than our understanding of it. And that is not something to fear. That is something to celebrate, because it means the adventure is never over. There is always another question to ask. Always another apple to watch fall. The village of Woolsthorpe is still there today. The house where Newton was born still stands. And in the garden, there is still an apple tree. Is it the exact same tree, the one under which Newton sat and watched that famous apple fall? Historians have debated this for years. The tree fell and was replanted. New branches grew from old roots. Perhaps the tree that stands today is a descendant of Newton's tree, not the original. The roots go back, even if the branches are new. It is a kind of perfect metaphor. The roots of Newton's ideas go so deep into human history that everything we have built since, all of modern science, all of modern technology, all of our understanding of the physical universe, has grown from those roots. New branches, new discoveries, new questions. But the roots are Newton's. When the Apollo astronauts landed on the moon in 1969, they were, in a very real sense, the fruit of a tree planted in a small English garden 300 years before. When a physicist today studies the movement of distant stars, they are following a path that Newton first walked. When a student solves an equation about force and velocity, they are using tools that Newton built. The apple fell. The boy watched, and the world was changed forever. There is one last thing worth knowing about Isaac Newton. On the day he died, he said something that has stayed in the hearts of many people who have read it. He spoke quietly to those around him. He said that he did not know how the world perceived him, but to himself, he had seemed like a boy playing on the seashore, diverting himself by finding a smooth pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, while the great ocean of truth lay undiscovered before him. A great ocean of truth. Imagine spending your entire life discovering extraordinary things, rewriting the laws of the universe, changing the course of human history, and still seeing yourself as a child at the edge of an ocean, playing with pebbles. That is not self-pity. That is not false modesty. That is profound wisdom. It is the wisdom of someone who understood that knowledge has no ceiling, that the universe is infinitely larger and more complex and more beautiful than any one mind can fully grasp. And it is an invitation to all of us to go to that ocean, to pick up our own pebbles, to look out at the water and feel the wonder of how much there is still left to discover. Isaac Newton did not just give us the laws of gravity. He gave us permission to be curious. He showed us that a question is not a weakness. A question is a beginning. And every great beginning starts with a single, quiet moment. A moment like a boy under an apple tree, watching something fall, and simply asking why.